If you walked into a ballroom where the person who betrayed you called someone else royalty, would you fight to disappear? Or would you dare to show the world that the real queen doesn't need a crown? The Windsor Metropolitan Hotel never shined brighter than it did on the night Charlotte Lawrence's life collapsed. That evening, the ballroom became a playground for Manhattan's elite, a swirl of tailored tuxedos, designer gowns, and the sharp, unspoken competition of old money and new ambition. Outside, paparazzi lights danced against the marble columns, but inside, nobody cared about anything except being seen, envied, and remembered. Charlotte felt out of place from the moment she entered, clutching her small velvet purse, the soft silk of her midnight blue gown brushing against her swollen belly. She was 6 months pregnant and trying her best to look put together, but even as she smiled politely at acquaintances and shook hands with strangers, she felt their stares. Some pitying, some curious, some sharp as knives. She had come to support her husband, Gregory Lawrence, the evening's host and the man she had believed was the center of her universe. Charlotte tried to tell herself that tonight would be a turning point for their marriage. That he'd finally look at her the way he used to. Proud, devoted, in love. That they'd be a family again, not just two people sharing a penthouse and a last name. But as the room buzzed with excitement, Charlotte realized something was wrong. She spotted a few familiar faces, women she'd once called friends, women who now avoided her eyes, whispering behind flutes of champagne. The energy felt different. It was electric, tense, and it wasn't just the anticipation of the charity auction. There was a rumor in the air, a secret about to detonate. Then, suddenly, the lights dimmed and a hush fell. Every head turned toward the grand staircase as the MC, a man with a radio announcer's voice, commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our gracious host, Gregory Lawrence." Gregory appeared, every inch the golden boy, his tuxedo crisp, his smile blinding. But he wasn't alone. On his arm, dressed in a gown of molten gold, was Marissa Dale, the influencer, the rumor, the problem Charlotte had tried to ignore for months. The woman who had, through veiled posts and private DMs, made it clear she was a threat. Gregory didn't hesitate, didn't falter. He led Marissa right into the spotlight, pausing on the stairs so the crowd could drink in the spectacle. Cameras flashed, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Charlotte stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. For a moment, the world slowed. Gregory leaned into the mic and said words that would haunt Charlotte for years. "I'd like you all to meet someone truly special. Marissa Dale, royalty in every sense of the word. She's changed my life." The crowd erupted in applause, but it sounded like thunder to Charlotte, loud, merciless, and drowning out her own silent scream. She watched as Gregory kissed Marissa's hand, then whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, head thrown back like she owned the night. The humiliation burned hotter than anything Charlotte had ever felt. She saw guests watching her, some with smug delight, some with shallow sympathy. Her vision blurred, her feet heavy as concrete. She tried to move, but her body refused. She tried to blink back tears, but they welled up anyway, threatening to ruin her carefully composed face. Charlotte wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up and find this was just a nightmare. But reality pressed in. The cameras, the whispers, the knowledge that her husband had brought his mistress, no, his royalty, to the most important night of his career, that he had chosen this public, brutal way to erase her. As she stood there, desperate and alone, Marissa looked directly at her. Their eyes met. One woman victorious, the other vanquished. Marissa's smile widened, cruel and triumphant. She mouthed two words, "Thank you." That was the breaking point. Charlotte turned, pushing past a knot of socialites who gasped in staged concern. She stumbled out into the lobby, her hand shaking as she pressed the elevator button. Every muscle in her body screamed. The memory of every kind word Gregory had ever spoken shattered in her mind, replaced by the sharp image of him on those stairs, basking in Marissa's glow. In the privacy of the elevator, Charlotte let herself sob, shoulders shaking as silent tears stained her cheeks. She gripped the railing, her thoughts spiraling between rage and heartbreak. How could he do this? How could he humiliate her so publicly while she carried his child? What had she done to deserve this? But deep inside her, a new feeling began to take root, one colder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than grief. She wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls. This was not the end of her story. This was the beginning. If Gregory wanted a show, she would give him one he would never forget. Tonight, Charlotte Lawrence was done being the silent, suffering wife. The next time she walked into a room, the world would see a different woman, a woman who didn't need anyone's approval, and certainly not a man who called his mistress royalty. As the elevator doors opened onto the city's neon-lit streets, Charlotte stepped out, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She was about to show everyone, including Gregory and Marissa, that a queen never loses her crown. She simply chooses the right moment to claim her throne. Charlotte didn't remember much about how she got home that night. Her driver said she sat in silence the entire ride, her phone buzzing again and again with messages, some from friends pretending to check on her, most from reporters sniffing for scandal. She let the phone die, stared out at the city lights, and tried to hold herself together for the sake of the tiny life growing inside her. Her apartment, once a symbol of everything she and Gregory had built together, now felt as cold as a hotel lobby. The walls echoed with memories, late-night talks, takeout on the floor, dreams whispered in the darkness. Now, all she could feel was emptiness, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel safe again. She walked straight to the nursery, a half-finished room filled with expensive baby gifts and designer furniture, still in boxes. The crib stood in the corner, draped in a blanket her mother had knitted, a reminder of a family that still believed Gregory was a good man. Charlotte sat on the edge of the rocking chair, placed a hand on her stomach, and tried to steady her breathing. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered. "You have me. I promise you'll always have me." But the truth was, she felt like she had nothing left. Charlotte's mind raced with questions, each more painful than the last. Had she missed the signs? Had Gregory always been this heartless? Or had she just loved him too much to see the truth? How long had everyone else known? How long had Marissa been waiting for her moment to win? She remembered the beginning, how Gregory swept her off her feet at a networking gala, how he'd seemed different from every other man in the room. He'd told her she was special, that he needed someone real by his side, someone who understood ambition but didn't crave the spotlight. They'd moved in together after just 4 months, married after a year. It felt like destiny. For a while, Charlotte had been happy. She worked as a project coordinator for a nonprofit, a job that wasn't glamorous but made her proud. Gregory encouraged her at first. He'd even attended a fundraiser or two, bragging about her work to his boardroom friends. But as his star rose and his circles grew glitzier, Charlotte began to notice the small cracks in their relationship. He'd come home later and later, brushing off her worries with a kiss on the cheek and a quick excuse about a last-minute deal or working dinner. The phone calls started. The text messages late at night. The way Gregory suddenly became obsessed with his image, his tailored suits, his workouts, his Instagram account that was now full of sleek photos of luxury events and inspiring quotes, none of which sounded like him. Charlotte felt herself being squeezed out of his world, little by little, until she was just a shadow in her own life. The night she told him she was pregnant, she'd expected everything to change. She thought he'd look at her and see his future, their family. Instead, he'd looked stunned, almost disappointed, and then he'd smiled, hugged her, and told her not to worry, that he'd take care of everything. But from that moment on, something shifted. He became even more distant. He started treating her like a delicate problem he didn't want to handle. Now, as Charlotte sat alone in the nursery, she replayed every argument, every cold shoulder, every time Gregory had said she was being dramatic or too sensitive. She realized she'd been fighting for a man who had already moved on, maybe not in public, but certainly in his heart. A wave of nausea hit her, sharper than anything she'd felt during her pregnancy. She stumbled to the bathroom, knelt by the toilet, and wept as quietly as she could. Not for Gregory. Not even for herself. But for the version of her life that had died in that ballroom. When the tears finally stopped, Charlotte stood up, rinsed her face, and stared at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. her eyes swollen, her hair a mess, her mouth set in a hard, straight line. She thought of all the times Gregory had called her his angel, his rock, the reason he worked so hard. Lies, she realized, just words. And then she thought about Marissa, the girl who had everything handed to her, beauty, fame, the attention of a man who craved adoration above all else. Charlotte wondered if Marissa had ever felt lonely, or if she even cared about the trail of broken hearts she left behind. A spark of anger flared inside her, hot and sudden. For the first time, Charlotte felt something stronger than pain. She felt a need to fight, not for Gregory, but for herself, and for the baby who would soon depend on her for everything. She sat back down and opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed. She started with her resume, updating it for the first time in 2 years. She reached out to old friends, colleagues, people who still saw her as Charlotte, not Gregory's wife. She called her mother and told her the truth, tears and all, and heard the love and strength in her mother's voice. "You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. You always have been. Don't let him take that away." It was the first time Charlotte had believed it. As the sun crept over the city, washing her apartment in pale gold light, Charlotte felt a tiny kick from inside her belly, a reminder that life goes on, even when everything falls apart. She pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And she believed it. Because that night, for the first time, Charlotte Lawrence stopped being the girl he thought he knew. She started becoming the woman she was meant to be. Charlotte learned the hard way that heartbreak doesn't keep business hours. The next morning, the city's tabloids blared headlines about Gregory's royal romance and Marissa's show-stopping debut, complete with photographs of Charlotte's stunned face in the background. The humiliation wasn't just private, it was public, and it stung more than she'd ever imagined. Her phone rang all day with calls from concerned friends and relatives who wanted to gossip under the pretense of comfort. Even her social media accounts became battlefields, as strangers left comments ranging from empty sympathy to barely veiled cruelty. "Chin up, Charlotte. You'll bounce back," someone wrote, while another sneered, "Well, at least the baby will have a rich dad." She deleted the apps, blocked numbers, and pulled the curtains tight. But the pain still found its way in. Charlotte's mother flew in that afternoon, refusing to take no for an answer. She arrived with a suitcase full of home-cooked meals, practical advice, and a kind of warmth that made the cold, empty apartment feel a little less lonely. Together, they set about organizing the nursery, unpacking boxes, and folding tiny clothes. With each onesie, each blanket, Charlotte found herself breathing a little easier. Still, the silence between the moments was thick with questions. "What now?" her mother finally asked, handing her a cup of tea. Charlotte stared out the window at the pulsing city below. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just don't want to be afraid anymore." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Being afraid is human, honey. But you? You're more than just a scared woman. You're a mother now, and that baby's going to need you to be fierce." It was the first time Charlotte felt the tiniest spark of hope. Maybe she couldn't erase what happened, but she could choose what to do next. Meanwhile, the world outside kept spinning. Gregory and Marissa were everywhere. Gossip columns, fashion blogs, even a late-night talk show that replayed the moment he called Marissa royalty as the crowd laughed. No one cared about the pregnant wife left behind, except as a footnote to someone else's scandal. One afternoon, Charlotte's old boss from the nonprofit called, her voice gentle. "We heard what happened. If you ever want to come back, even part-time, the door's open." It was the first olive branch she'd received, and she grabbed it. She began working remotely, planning community events and writing grant proposals from her living room, rediscovering the passion she'd set aside for Gregory's career. For the first time in months, she felt needed, valuable, alive. But the new reality also brought harsh reminders. Her attorney called to talk about her rights, her options, and the ugly logistics of separation. She'd have to face Gregory again, not as his wife, but as his adversary. It was a thought that made her sick, but also strangely determined. Then came the invitations, not to glamorous galas or charity auctions, but to mediation meetings and financial disclosures. Gregory predictably didn't show up in person. He sent his lawyer, a woman who smiled politely but never looked Charlotte in the eye. Still, Charlotte sat tall, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Fierce. You have to be fierce. Every day was a test of her strength. Some nights she still woke up sobbing, haunted by dreams of that ballroom, that staircase, that moment when her whole life fell apart. But in the daylight, she found herself piecing things back together, bit by bit. She began to see herself differently in the mirror. Not just a woman abandoned, but a woman surviving. Her belly grew rounder, her steps grew more purposeful. She set small goals: cook dinner, go for a walk, finish a work assignment. Each checkmark felt like a victory. She even allowed herself to hope that the worst was behind her, until one morning, as she left her apartment, she found a glossy invitation wedged under her door. It was for Gregory's birthday gala. Not just any party, but the event of the year. A lavish affair with all the city's power players. The front read, hosted by Gregory Lawrence and Marissa Dale. Dress code, royalty. The nerve. Charlotte's hands shook as she read it. It was a taunt, pure and simple. But instead of tears, she felt a strange, cold clarity settle over her. She wouldn't hide, she wouldn't cower, she would face them and the whole city on her own terms. But how? What could she do to reclaim her dignity, her power, her narrative? That night, Charlotte called her old friend Ava, a stylist who'd helped her with fundraisers back when Gregory still cared about her opinion. She told Ava everything, every detail, every wound, every humiliation. Ava listened, then said, "Honey, you want to make an entrance? I'll help you burn the place down, with style." The two women spent the next week plotting Charlotte's return to the social scene. They worked on her look, hair, makeup, wardrobe. But more than that, they worked on her confidence. Ava taught Charlotte how to walk, how to hold her head high, how to look right past the people who once tried to break her. They chose a dress unlike anything Charlotte had ever worn, a custom creation in shimmering ivory silk, tailored to her new curves, elegant and powerful. It was a dress for a woman who had survived, a woman reborn. As the gala approached, Charlotte rehearsed her entrance again and again, standing in her bedroom, imagining the moment she would walk into that room, every eye on her, not in pity, but in awe. But more than anything, Charlotte knew this was about more than just one night. It was about proving to herself that she was still standing, still fighting, still worthy. The day of the gala, Charlotte stood before her mirror, her heart pounding. She thought of the woman she'd been, the girl left behind, the wife erased, the mother forgotten, and she thought of the woman she was becoming, strong, fierce, and ready to reclaim her story. She pressed a hand to her stomach and smiled at her reflection, whispering, "Tonight we walk in together, and no one will ever make us feel small again." With that, Charlotte Lawrence, pregnant, betrayed but unbroken, prepared to step back into the spotlight. This time the story would be hers. The night of Gregory's birthday gala arrived with a thrum of anticipation that stretched across the entire city. Everyone who mattered, politicians, business tycoons, celebrities, old money socialites, was going to be there. For weeks, gossip sites had speculated. Would the jilted ex-wife dare show her face? Would Marissa, Gregory's royalty, finally be accepted as queen of the night? No one expected a showdown. No one thought Charlotte would have the guts to show up, let alone outshine them all. But they had never really known Charlotte at all. The grand ballroom at the Astoria Plaza glittered like the crown jewels themselves. Ice sculptures shimmered, golden champagne flowed endlessly, and waiters moved like ghosts through a sea of gowns and tuxedos. Cameras flashed as the guests arrived, each one hungry for a glimpse of the drama everyone secretly hoped for. In the center of it all, Gregory stood tall in a bespoke midnight blue suit, Marissa clinging to his arm, their smiles wide and performative. They looked every bit the power couple, rich, beautiful, untouchable. Inside, Marissa was loving every second of it. She greeted guests with a confident air, showing off her designer dress and dazzling jewelry. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, barely able to hide her glee as she overheard people whispering about her triumph. This was her moment. She had waited for it her entire life. What Marissa didn't realize was that she wasn't the only woman who'd been preparing for this night. Outside, Charlotte sat in the back of a town car, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded, but her expression was calm. She wore the custom ivory silk gown Ava had designed, her hair pulled into a soft, elegant chignon. Her makeup was flawless, timeless, powerful, and a little bit defiant. Her only jewelry was a pair of pearl earrings, a gift from her late grandmother. She wanted to look like herself, only stronger. The driver opened the door, and Charlotte stepped onto the red carpet. The air crackled. For a split second, everything went silent. Then the cameras exploded, flashing, shouting, calling her name as if she were the guest of honor. She didn't flinch. She walked slowly, her posture tall, her gaze focused straight ahead. It didn't matter that her heart was pounding like a drum. She wouldn't let them see fear. The doorman greeted her with the same respect they'd shown every other guest. Inside, the hush returned as people turned and stared. Some mouths fell open. Others whispered, "Is that? Oh my God, she looks incredible. She's actually here." But Charlotte didn't stop to acknowledge them. She was here on her own terms. From across the ballroom, Gregory saw her first. For a moment, he looked shocked, then almost annoyed. Marissa followed his gaze and saw Charlotte gliding through the crowd, her baby bump framed elegantly by the ivory silk. Marissa's face faltered. She gripped Gregory's arm tighter, whispering something urgent. Gregory muttered back, his jaw tightening. As Charlotte made her way toward the center of the room, she could feel eyes on her from every angle. The music softened. Even the waiters paused. She reached the bottom of the grand staircase and paused, taking a steadying breath. Marissa moved first, breaking away from Gregory to intercept her. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the marble floor. "Charlotte, I didn't think you'd actually show," she said, her smile sharp and false. "You look better than I expected." Charlotte smiled softly. "Thank you, Marissa. It's good to see you too." Gregory approached, slipping an arm around Marissa's waist for the benefit of the onlookers. "Charlotte, I hope you're not here to cause a scene. This is a special night for Marissa and me." Charlotte shook her head, her voice calm. "Gregory, I have no interest in your scene. I just came to wish you a happy birthday and to remind you that dignity can't be bought, no matter how many cameras are watching." The tension was thick, and people strained to hear every word. Charlotte kept her composure, refusing to be drawn into a catfight. Instead, she turned and walked away, moving through the crowd with her head held high. For the rest of the night, she was a sensation. People approached her with cautious admiration. A few whispered their support, others just stared in awe. She found Ava, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "You did it. You look like the queen he wishes he'd kept." Marissa, meanwhile, was furious. She spent the night fuming in the shadow of Charlotte's entrance, her jealousy growing with every compliment Charlotte received. She tried to cling to Gregory, but he was distracted, glancing Charlotte's way, remembering a time when he'd been proud to be her husband. The power Marissa thought she'd won suddenly felt as fragile as glass. Charlotte barely noticed. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Seen, respected, untouchable. She made polite conversation, accepted congratulations, and even danced once with an old friend from her nonprofit days. It was a small rebellion, a statement to herself and the world that she was back. But beneath the glamour, the night was a battleground. Marissa's bitterness grew, and Gregory's insecurities started to show. The masks they wore for the public began to slip. At one point, Charlotte overheard Marissa snapping at Gregory. "You said she'd never show her face again. Do something. She's stealing all my attention." Gregory's face reddened, but he just muttered, "Relax, Marissa. It's one night." But Charlotte saw the fear behind Marissa's eyes. The world had expected a broken woman, wrath, but Charlotte had delivered strength and grace instead. No one was talking about royalty anymore. They were talking about her. As midnight approached, Charlotte slipped away quietly, the room buzzing in her wake. Outside, she looked up at the city skyline and let herself breathe for the first time all night. She had walked into the lion's den and come out untouched. She knew the war wasn't over. Marissa and Gregory would keep scheming, keep trying to write her out of their story. But tonight, she'd reminded everyone, including herself, who she really was, and she was just getting started. The days after the gala should have felt triumphant for Charlotte, but victory always tastes different when you're fighting to survive. The press went wild. Social media exploded with side-by-side photos of Charlotte's dazzling entrance and Marissa's barely contained rage. Headlines ranged from "Scorned ex-wife outshines royalty at gala" to "Lawrence love triangle," Who really runs New York? Everyone had an opinion, and Charlotte's inbox flooded with messages, some supportive, some cruel, and most from people she barely knew. At first, Charlotte wanted to hide from it all. She dreaded opening her email, turning on the TV, even walking outside for fear of running into someone who'd seen the viral videos. She tried to focus on her nonprofit work, on her health, and on preparing for the baby. But it was impossible to ignore the whispers and stares. Even trips to the grocery store felt like walking through a minefield. She heard her name everywhere. The worst part was the betrayal that came next. Not from Gregory, not even from Marissa, but from the people Charlotte had thought were her friends. One by one, invitations dried up. Couples she'd dined with for years stopped replying to her texts. The group chat she'd helped start suddenly went silent. The message was clear. In their world, you are only valuable as long as you belong to the man at the top. But Charlotte refused to be erased. Instead of shrinking away, she leaned in. She used her growing platform to talk about resilience, single motherhood, and the strength it takes to start over. She gave interviews, not to tabloid reporters hungry for tears, but to women's magazines and podcasts that wanted the truth, not just the drama. She told her story honestly, and people listened. Meanwhile, Gregory and Marissa's fairy tale started to unravel under the public glare. Their relationship, built on spectacle and spite, began to crack. Gregory, so used to admiration, was rattled by the way the media now portrayed him. A callous, self-absorbed husband who discarded his pregnant wife for a social climber. Marissa's influencer deals dried up as brands worried about backlash. Rumors surfaced that Marissa had demanded Gregory propose, but he kept delaying, blaming bad timing and negative press. The real storm hit one Friday morning. Charlotte was at home, reviewing a proposal for a literacy campaign, when her phone lit up with dozens of alerts. Video clips from the gala had surfaced, unedited, unfiltered, and showing more than anyone had realized. Someone had recorded Marissa sneering at Charlotte as she walked in, whispering, "She's nothing." Gregory only kept her around for the sympathy vote. The audio was crystal clear. Public opinion flipped in an instant. Where people had once called Charlotte a victim, they now called her a survivor. Comment sections filled with outrage toward Marissa and sympathy for Charlotte. "No woman deserves that," wrote one. "She walked in like a queen while they acted like children," wrote another. Within hours, talk shows and news programs were dissecting every frame of the footage. Gregory tried to do damage control, releasing a bland statement about privacy and moving on. Marissa posted a carefully curated Instagram apology, but the backlash was immediate. Brands began to drop her. Her follower count plummeted. The tide had turned, and for the first time, Charlotte wasn't the one left drowning. But with every wave of support, new challenges rose. Gregory's lawyer reached out, pushing for a quiet divorce and warning Charlotte that if she didn't cooperate, the family money would disappear. "Don't fight me on this, Charlotte," Gregory's email read. "Let's settle this privately, for the baby's sake." It was a threat dressed as concern, and it only made Charlotte more determined. She hired her own legal team, recommended by Ava, fiercely competent and unafraid to play hardball. Together, they began the work of untangling years of shared assets, investments, and secrets. Every meeting was a reminder of what she'd survived. Every signed paper, every demand for transparency made her stronger. In the background, the city buzzed with rumors. Stories surfaced about Gregory's questionable business practices, Marissa's affairs, and the lies that had propped up their glittering world. The higher they had climbed, the farther they had to fall. One night, as Charlotte tried to sleep, she received a message from a woman she didn't know. The woman claimed to have dated Gregory before Charlotte and warned, "He'll try to make you look crazy. He always does." Instead of fear, Charlotte felt only resolve. She'd spent enough years doubting herself. She wouldn't let anyone rewrite her story again. As the weeks dragged on, the court dates approached. Charlotte's belly grew, the baby kicking with new strength every day, a reminder that life was moving forward whether Gregory liked it or not. Her mother stayed by her side, helping with meals, errands, and the emotional whiplash of rebuilding a life from scratch. Ava became her champion in public and private, always reminding her, "You already won the moment you chose yourself." Charlotte's days became a mix of survival and strategy. She prepared for every hearing like a battle, never sure what lies Gregory's team would invent. But each time she walked into the courtroom, she did so with her head high, her resolve hardened by months of humiliation and self-doubt. She learned to trust herself again. She learned to trust the friends who had stayed, the family that never wavered, and the new community of women who cheered her on from the sidelines. She learned that sometimes the greatest betrayal is not what someone does to you, but what you let them convince you about yourself. By the time the first official court hearing arrived, Charlotte no longer felt like the woman who had been humiliated in front of the world. She felt like someone reborn, tough, scarred, but powerful in a way she'd never expected. And as she stepped into that courtroom, camera flashes bouncing off the marble floors, she whispered to herself, "They wanted a show. Let's give them one they'll never forget." Charlotte never imagined how much strength it would take just to keep breathing. Courtroom days blurred together, each one a test of her patience, her dignity, and her will to fight for herself and her unborn child. The city watched every move. News vans lined the courthouse steps, commentators speculated on TV, and every morning Charlotte woke to new headlines dissecting her every gesture. She had become a symbol for women everywhere, but when the world wasn't looking, she was just tired, pregnant, and alone. Gregory made everything harder than it needed to be. Instead of taking responsibility, he fought her on every detail. He denied promises he'd made, questioned her character in court documents, and even hinted that maybe the baby wasn't his. The accusation cut deeper than any betrayal so far. Charlotte's lawyer objected instantly, but the words lingered in the air, cold and poisonous. Charlotte stared straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see her break. Marissa, too, made her presence known. She came to the hearings wearing designer sunglasses, arm in arm with Gregory, acting as if the entire ordeal was just another event to be survived for the cameras. She'd smirk at Charlotte, whisper to Gregory, then flash a dazzling smile at the reporters outside. But there was a tension in her movements, a nervous energy that suggested all was not well behind the scenes. The pressure built with every hearing. Charlotte found herself on the verge of tears more often than she wanted to admit. Some days she had to lock herself in the bathroom, breathing in and out, counting to 10 as her baby kicked inside her, reminding her that she couldn't give up. Her mother and Ava were always there, a quiet army of love and loyalty, but in the darkest moments, it felt like she was fighting the world alone. Things reached a breaking point one afternoon during a particularly brutal mediation session. Gregory's lawyer pushed a stack of papers across the table, smirking. "Your client wants to keep the apartment, the car, and full custody?" he sneered. "On what grounds? Being a social media martyr doesn't entitle her to Gregory's fortune." Charlotte's attorney remained calm. "We're not here to debate hashtags, we're here to protect a mother and her child." Gregory's voice cut through the room. "You never cared about my career, Charlotte. All you cared about was looking good in public. You were never enough for me. Marissa gets it. She's ambitious. She makes things happen." Charlotte flinched, the words sharp as knives, but she didn't cry. She just looked at Gregory, really looked at him. For the first time, she saw a man who was scared, cornered, and desperate to blame someone else for his own emptiness. The mediation ended in stalemate. Outside, Charlotte's hands shook so badly she could barely hold her purse. The building felt enormous, cold and unfriendly, its marble halls echoing with the footsteps of men like Gregory. She wanted to collapse, to let the exhaustion swallow her whole. But she couldn't, because now, more than ever, the world was watching. That night, alone in her apartment, Charlotte reached her lowest point. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if any of it was worth it. She remembered every promise she'd made to herself, every dream she'd had about family and love and the future. All of it seemed so far away now, replaced by paperwork, arguments, and the growing sense that she was losing herself in the fight. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." In the darkness, her phone buzzed. A message from Ava. It was simple. "You're not alone. Not ever. Don't let him win." Charlotte read the words over and over. For the first time in weeks, she let herself sob, letting the pain wash over her and out. She cried for the life she'd lost, the love she'd given, and the woman she used to be. But as the tears slowed, something shifted deep inside her. She realized that what Gregory and Marissa feared most wasn't a headline or a scandal. It was her, standing tall, refusing to disappear, showing them and the world that some women don't break. They bend, and then they rise. She made a decision. No more hiding, no more shrinking, no more letting others decide her worth. If Gregory wanted a war, she'd give him one, and she'd fight it on her terms. The next morning, Charlotte called her lawyer. "I want to pursue everything I'm owed," she said, her voice steady. "Every asset, every right. Not just for me, but for my child." She began documenting everything. Every message, every broken promise, every lie. She hired a financial investigator to look into Gregory's business dealings, and when the investigator found discrepancies, Charlotte made sure the right people heard about it. She spoke with women's advocacy groups, sharing her story to empower others and build a support system that went far beyond her own situation. The more she fought, the stronger she became. She started sleeping better. She started eating well, taking care of herself not just as a mother, but as a woman with a future. She went for walks, met with old friends, and even laughed again, real, full laughs that reminded her she was still alive. Gregory noticed. His calls became more desperate, his lawyer more aggressive. Marissa started posting cryptic messages on social media, hinting at betrayals and secrets. The pressure was on, and this time, it wasn't Charlotte who was crumbling. One afternoon, after a particularly successful legal meeting, Charlotte returned home and found a letter slipped under her door. No return address, no name, just a single sheet of paper with 4 words, "You are winning. Don't stop." She held the note to her chest and smiled. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she believed it. The breaking point hadn't destroyed her. It had set her free. The city buzzed with rumors, but no one outside Charlotte's circle knew what was really coming next. The public saw a pregnant woman fighting her husband in court, but behind the scenes, Charlotte was gathering more than just evidence. She was discovering the truth about who she really was and what she was capable of. It began with the financial investigator Charlotte had hired, an old friend of her father's, discreet but relentless. He dug deep into Gregory's business holdings, his investments, and the trust funds he'd tried to hide offshore. One morning, just as dawn turned the city pink, Charlotte's phone rang. It was the investigator, his voice low and urgent. "You might want to sit down," he told her. "Gregory's company isn't just hiding assets. He's been funneling money through shell corporations, and your name is still on some of the founding documents. That makes you a major shareholder, more than he is, in fact." Charlotte was stunned. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying if you want to, you can take control. Legally, he can fight you, but with your signatures, your records, and this evidence, the courts will almost certainly side with you." For the first time, Charlotte felt something other than fear or anger. She felt power. But that wasn't the only secret Charlotte unearthed. Through her nonprofit work and growing network, she found out Marissa was far from the innocent, new love Gregory had painted her to be. A whisper from a former assistant, a DM from a brand rep. Little by little, a pattern emerged. Marissa had been targeting wealthy men for years, climbing from one high-profile relationship to another, leaving chaos in her wake. Her relationship with Gregory had started before Charlotte and Gregory had even officially separated. The press didn't know any of this yet. But Charlotte was no longer interested in playing defense. It was time to step into the light. She met with her legal team and the investigator, reviewing every detail. They mapped out a strategy, not just to protect herself and her child, but to ensure Gregory and Marissa faced consequences for what they'd done. Charlotte wanted dignity and justice, not just for her, but for anyone who'd ever been told to stay quiet and take the blame. But there was one more surprise no one, not even Charlotte, had anticipated. One evening, as she packed away baby clothes and sorted paperwork, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find an elegantly dressed older woman, sharp-eyed, with an air of authority. It was Gregory's mother, Eleanor, whom Charlotte hadn't seen since before the separation. "May I come in?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was gentle but determined. Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. She made tea, and they sat in the living room, awkward at first. But then Eleanor reached out, her hands trembling slightly. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said. "I raised Gregory to believe love was something you earned, not something you gave. That was my mistake. But I see you, Charlotte. I see what you've been through and what you're still standing for. I want to help." Charlotte was too shocked to speak for a moment. Eleanor continued, "Gregory thinks he's untouchable, but his board is tired of the bad press, the reckless spending, the scandals. I have influence more than he realizes. If you want to make a real move, take control of your share, make a public statement, whatever you need, I'll back you." For the first time in months, Charlotte felt a sense of family she hadn't realized she'd missed. She accepted Eleanor's support, and together they made a plan. Charlotte would attend the next board meeting, not as a humiliated wife, but as a major shareholder, armed with evidence and confidence. The night before the meeting, Charlotte barely slept. She stood in the nursery, stroking her belly, whispering, "Tomorrow, everything changes. Not just for me, but for you. For us." She could hardly believe how far she'd come, from crying in the dark to standing at the edge of real power. When the morning came, Charlotte dressed carefully in a navy suit, professional, commanding, and perfect for a woman about to take back her life. Ava and her mother were there, giving her last-minute hugs and pep talks. "You're not going there to beg," Ava reminded her. "You're going there to lead. You earned this." Charlotte arrived at the boardroom early, her heart pounding, but her head clear. When Gregory entered, flanked by Marissa and their legal team, he tried to sneer, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. The room was full of men who had never bothered to look her in the eye. Today, she made sure they saw her. The meeting began with routine business, but soon Charlotte stood, presenting the evidence of Gregory's financial mismanagement, the shell companies, the risk to investors, and her own controlling stake. Eleanor spoke next, confirming everything Charlotte said, her voice strong and unwavering. The board members looked from Gregory to Charlotte, realizing the balance of power had shifted. By the end of the meeting, the outcome was clear. Charlotte was voted interim chairwoman. Gregory was suspended pending an internal review. Marissa's face turned sheet white. Gregory erupted in protest, but the board ignored him. As Charlotte left the building, reporters surged forward, but this time she wasn't running. She paused, spoke clearly, and said, "I will always stand up for myself and for what's right, for my family, for my child, and for anyone who's ever been told to keep quiet. That time is over." The city had a new story now, and Charlotte Lawrence was its unexpected star. The news of Charlotte's dramatic rise spread through the city like wildfire. In the days after she took over as interim chairwoman, the company's stock stabilized. Business journalists who had once dismissed her as nothing more than a socialite or the pregnant wife now called her bold, decisive, and unshakable. She did interviews not about her heartbreak, but about responsible leadership, rebuilding trust, and putting families before egos. Her every move was watched, analyzed, and sometimes, for the first time, admired. Inside the company, some resisted the changes. A handful of Gregory's allies grumbled behind closed doors, hoping she would stumble or crack under pressure. But Charlotte had prepared for this. Every morning, she met with the company's executive team, listening more than she spoke, asking tough questions, and learning from those who wanted her to succeed. She brought in outside consultants to clean up the mess Gregory had made and set up new programs for working parents, an unspoken message to every woman who'd ever felt sidelined. Marissa was nowhere to be found. In the fallout of the boardroom coup, her influencer deals dried up completely. Paparazzi snapped photos of her leaving Gregory's penthouse with packed bags, her face hidden by oversized sunglasses. Charlotte refused to let her bitterness distract her from the work ahead. She had what she needed: control, dignity, and a future for herself and her baby. But reclaiming her power wasn't just about business. With her new role came new confidence. Charlotte invested in herself for the first time in years. She updated her wardrobe, not for Gregory, not for the cameras, but for herself. She got a new haircut, bold and fresh, the kind that turned heads in the elevator. She resumed yoga classes and started taking long, slow walks through the city parks, letting her mind clear and her spirit heal. People noticed the change. Her nonprofit colleagues cheered her on, texting encouragement and sending flowers to her office. Her mother and Ava beamed with pride at every headline, every step forward. Even strangers, women she'd never met, wrote letters and emails thanking her for showing what was possible after betrayal. Yet not everyone was thrilled with her comeback. Gregory, now banned from the company offices, launched a PR campaign to win sympathy. He appeared on morning shows, telling glossy versions of the story where he was misunderstood and heartbroken. He tried to portray Charlotte as ruthless, a woman who'd stolen his life's work. But the public was tired of his act. When a reporter finally asked Gregory if he regretted calling Marissa royalty, he hesitated, then stammered, I think I made some mistakes. Charlotte, for her part, kept her public comments measured and kind. Everyone makes mistakes, she told a news anchor, but not everyone is willing to grow from them. I believe in forgiveness, but I also believe in accountability. We can all do better, for ourselves and for the next generation. Privately, the changes were even more profound. The baby's nursery, once a room of sorrow and unfinished dreams, was now bright and welcoming, filled with hand-painted murals, soft music, and a sense of hope. Charlotte played classical music every evening, sitting in her rocking chair, reading aloud from her favorite childhood books. She talked to her baby about strength, kindness, and the importance of never letting anyone else define your worth. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Ava stopped by with takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. They laughed, reminisced, and made plans for the future. You know, Ava said, you're the only woman I know who could walk into a room full of enemies and leave with the crown. Charlotte smiled, feeling, for the first time in a long while, beautiful, powerful, and free. But the world had one more test in store. A week before the baby's due date, Charlotte received an official letter from the board. The internal investigation was complete. Gregory's financial misconduct had been proven beyond a doubt. The board offered her the permanent CEO position, not just as a figurehead, but with full executive powers and support. Her hands shook as she read it, pride, fear, and disbelief mixing in her chest. That night, she called her mother, barely able to contain her excitement. You did it, sweetheart, her mother said through happy tears. Not just for you, but for every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. Your baby is going to be so proud. The next morning, Charlotte made her first official act as CEO. She announced expanded family leave for all employees and funded a new foundation in her child's name, dedicated to supporting single parents. The news spread fast. Employees, some in tears, stopped her in the hallways to thank her. It was the legacy she wanted, not revenge, but real change. On the day she was set to be officially introduced as CEO at the annual shareholders gala, Charlotte stood in front of her closet, hands trembling. Her gown, deep emerald, with subtle gold beading, hugged her bump and made her feel both strong and regal. She remembered the first gala, months before, when Gregory had introduced Marissa as royalty. This time there would be no cruel jokes, no cameras hunting for her pain, only respect, admiration, and the knowledge that she had claimed her throne. As she made her entrance, the room went silent, then erupted in applause. She accepted flowers, shook hands, and gave a speech that moved many to tears. She thanked the people who believed in her, forgave those who doubted, and made a vow to lead with courage and compassion. For the first time in her life, Charlotte Lawrence walked into a room and knew, absolutely, that she belonged. She was no one's victim. She was the queen. The ballroom sparkled with crystal lights and hope as Charlotte stood center stage, the final applause still echoing in her ears. People rose from their seats, not just to honor her title or her victory, but to celebrate a story that had become so much bigger than one woman's heartbreak. The cameras caught her smile, but only a handful of people in the room could truly understand what that smile meant. It wasn't about revenge or even redemption. It was about freedom. That night, Charlotte lingered after the gala, accepting congratulations and sharing genuine laughter with employees and friends. For years, she'd let Gregory and society define her worth. Now, she set her own value, and it had nothing to do with who loved or left her. She had become the very role model she'd once searched for, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal into something unbreakable. In a quiet corner, she felt a gentle kick from her baby, a reminder of what really mattered. As guests filtered out, Ava found her, eyes shining with pride. "You've changed this city, she said. "And not just for yourself." Charlotte squeezed her hand. "We all change the world a little when we decide to stand up, Ava. I just wish it didn't have to hurt so much first." They laughed together, the kind of laughter that only survivors share. The ballroom slowly emptied, but Charlotte lingered, walking through the empty aisles. She thought of the woman she'd been, uncertain, afraid, waiting for someone to tell her she was enough. That woman was gone. In her place stood a leader, a mother, and a survivor who'd faced humiliation and loss and still walked with her head high. Outside, the city glowed. Charlotte took a long walk home, her heels clicking on the pavement, the late spring air cool and alive with promise. Every streetlight felt like a small star guiding her forward. She stopped to breathe it all in. The fresh start, the freedom, the pride that pulsed in her veins. Her phone buzzed with messages from employees, reporters, even strangers who had watched her journey unfold. There were stories of other women inspired to leave bad marriages, start new careers, or simply believe in themselves again. But not all messages were congratulations. As she reached her building, she saw one last text from Gregory. "You won. I hope you're happy. I lost everything." She stared at the words for a long moment. Once they would have broken her. Now she only felt a strange, gentle pity. She typed back, "You lost what you chose to lose. I only ever wanted respect. I hope someday you find it, for yourself and for everyone you hurt." She meant every word. The next morning, Charlotte woke with a calm she'd never known. The city felt different. The air itself seemed lighter. She spent the day in quiet reflection, journaling her gratitude, planning for the baby's arrival, and savoring her first real breath of peace in years. Her mother called to check in, promising to come stay for a while once the baby was born. Ava sent flowers and a silly card for Her Majesty, the CEO, Queen, and most unmessable woman in New York. But the most surprising visitor came that afternoon. Eleanor, Gregory's mother, stopped by with a small box. "This was my grandmother's," she said, pressing it into Charlotte's hands. "She used to say a woman's true legacy is not what she builds, but who she becomes. I know you'll teach your child the same." Inside the box was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with the words, "Strength is the only crown that matters." Charlotte wept, holding the bracelet tight, promising herself she would pass it down to her child one day, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of all they had survived together. As her due date approached, Charlotte wrapped up her work, prepared the nursery, and wrote letters to her future self and to her baby. Words of love, hope, and fierce encouragement. "You are not the mistakes of others," she wrote. "You are not the wounds you inherit. You are the story you write with your own two hands." When labor finally began, it was stormy outside, a wild, dramatic night that seemed to mirror the journey she'd traveled. Her mother held her hand through the pain, Ava waiting anxiously in the lobby. After hours of sweat and tears, Charlotte delivered a healthy baby girl, her cries strong and insistent. The nurses wrapped her in a blanket, placing her in Charlotte's arms. In that moment, all the heartbreak and struggle melted away, replaced by a love so deep it nearly scared her. She looked into her daughter's eyes and whispered, "You will never have to earn your worth. You are born with it. You are loved, always." News of the birth spread quickly, and for a brief moment, the city paused to celebrate not just a new CEO, but a new life and a new beginning. Gregory sent flowers and a note of congratulations, brief but sincere. Charlotte welcomed it as a symbol that even broken things can be mended, in small ways. As weeks passed, Charlotte settled into motherhood, juggling late-night feedings with executive calls and foundation work. She was exhausted but happy. The board meetings and legal battles faded into memory, replaced by baby giggles, first smiles, and a home filled with warmth. And so the story that began with betrayal ended not with revenge, but with grace, purpose, and a promise to raise her daughter to be bold, brave, and unafraid to stand up for herself, no matter what the world might say. Because the real royalty in this story wasn't in titles or money, but in every woman who survives heartbreak, reclaims her life, and leads with love. Charlotte Lawrence never needed anyone to crown her. She wore her legacy with pride, for everyone to see. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here with me until now? If you are, then maybe this story has touched your heart in some special way. You see, life isn't about avoiding pain or betrayal, It's about what you do when your world falls apart. Like Charlotte, sometimes the best version of ourselves is born from heartbreak. We learn that real power comes from within, not from someone else's approval or a fancy title. As heterodox wisdom says, you are not the wounds you inherit. You are the story you write with your own two hands. Healing isn't about revenge or proving your worth to others. It's about reclaiming your own story and choosing love, strength, and dignity. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell us what part moved you the most, or share your own story. This is a community where your voice matters. We're always here for you.